What makes a great album? That is a very tough question, one that might be impossible to pin down and find a definite answer for. Is it the catchy melodies, the emotional depth that rings within our souls, or perhaps the mastery of compositions that not only push the imagined limits and pre-existing expectations, but also matures to become evergreen? Time we spend pondering over these tough questions is, at the end of it, futile. There can never be a defining answer to them. Music is subjective, possibly one of the most subjective things that we as a people have discovered and created. Some of us will adore one thing, and some of us will abhor the same thing for equally valid reasons. But the best part about all of this is neither side of these arguments are the definite truth. Art is subjective, but it is also debatable, which is why we can discuss it, talk about why we enjoy a certain thing, just as well talk about why we dislike another aspect of the same thing. But before we delve too deeply into these contemplations, there must be an introduction as to what artist that is the main topic during this album review. Richard D. James, more famously recognized by his alias Aphex Twin and a million other aliases, is a British-based electronic musician born in 1971 in Limerick, Ireland. His music contributions to the world has completely transformed the world of music and inspired thousands of other musicians to copy and experiment with their own sound. Aphex is well known for his level of ambiguity when it comes to his music, personal life, and facts about himself. No one knows for certain why, but my personal guess is that he wishes to remain private without explicitly telling the world. He has never really discussed why he makes the music he makes, but he has talked about his processes. He hates sleeping, so he only sleeps for about 2 hours per day. He has gained the ability of lucid dreaming, being able to control his own dreams. And, allegedly, much of his earliest music was inspired or came from his dreams. The man himself has even stated that most of the songs from the album that I'm going to give a review of was made in dreams he had. The album in question is his second studio album, released back in 1994, under the name Aphex Twin. Selected Ambient Works, Volume 2. This album means so much to so many different people, but why is that? Most of the songs lack any form of progression, and most just stay in limbo for the majority of their running time. In technicality, the album is rather simple in the composition world, yet Richard has managed to make songs that are highly memorable and evocative. It is quite a miracle to say the least, as linear songs, more than not, have a greater chance of becoming stale and or forgettable. So, what makes this album so different? That is what I want to know. I sat down and took notes of each song, and hopefully after all of this, we can maybe get an idea of why this album is so special, as everyone says it is. Disclaimer: the album has a total of 4 different versions of its tracklist, one with 23 songs, another with 24, 25, and the complete version with 26 songs. The one in particular that I sat down with and talked about is the digital version available on Aphex Twin's official website, which contains all of the 26 tracks. All of the songs will be referred to in both their numeric and unofficial title versions to erase as much confusion as possible. As the album begins its runtime, we are greeted by a warm synth pad surrounding us in luscious sounds that brings the listener into a new but fairly comfortable environment. The first song, unofficially titled Cliffs, is quite the presentation for what is in store for the journey carved out by the upcoming songs. Soft sample snippets of what sounds like a woman softly yelping the words bap, tiff, yow, and shif frequently pops in and out, bringing in a familiar humanal element to these otherwise unknown sounds. Slowly over time, another synth gets more noticeable and prevalent and moves from simple single notes that echo to full-on scaled arpeggios. What seems like just another addition to a calming piece ends up shifting the focus over to these lively and colorful patterns of these sonic dots slowly descending in pitch, until we land on the ground, after floating in a sky of pleasing vibrations. As the last notes slowly fade into silence, we ready ourselves for whatever this album has in store for us. We have been painted a view of pleasantry, but will this view alter? Lurking out of the silence comes song number 2, also known as Radiator, comprising of a programmed synth fading in with increasing loudness, flicking out bombastic and slightly harsh sounding notes, which ring out their frequencies like they're being played in a brick room, tossed from left and right as the echo of the notes jump back and forth, completely engulfing us in these almost threatening atmospheres created by the thick, cold, and unforgiving notes emitting from the synth. Followed along the riff are other synths, droning a melody that plays along with the main riff, increasing in the discordant and disharmonic atmosphere. Another synth cooperatively tossing up metallic clicking, hissing, and scraping sounds, adding to the unpleasant but slightly predictable nature of this repetitive track. Without much in terms of sonic progressions occurring during the track's runtime, it is quite a jolt when there not only happens a chord change, but also an alteration of the programmed synth's repeating melody. This change sustains for around 50 seconds before inevitably switching back to its original state of chord choice and melody. The track keeps us in an unescapable cold and metallic trance for a solid 6.5 minutes before ending abruptly, leaving us in a cold yet rewarding silence. We remain in a dazed state of mind until the third track comes along and frees us from Radiator's mute grasp. Song 3, also unofficially titled as Rhubarb, might be the most well-known and welcoming track out of this absolute titan of an album, and there are great reasons for the song's popularity. It has a simple chord progression that is repeated through nearly the entire track at a steady pace, making the track predictable and fills us with a sense of familiarity, comfort, and warmth. It is only a bonus that the synths are warm. To me, and my ears, I think the synths sound like what I interpret as a symphony playing the song while being submerged in a massive tub of water. They have a sense of blurriness to them, but their notes still flow mostly effortless through the water, pulling us closer to the source. Slowly over the runtime of the song, a separate melody is played by a different synth, and proceeds to get a little pocket of time to shine at the forefront, amplifying the fact that Rhubarb has multiple stages of progression, making it slightly less repetitive than its other contemporary songs. As the last couple of repeating chords fade into silence, we've been wrapped in a sonic version of a weighted blanket, warmed up by the soothing nature of the track's phenomenal production, leaving us in a sense of euphoria and wishing that it wouldn't have had to come to a conclusion. After the pleasant and loving song Rhubarb ends and its silence is interrupted by the next track, we almost get whiplashed by a curveball tossed by our man Mr. James. The song establishes its presence by revealing to us a very screechy and abrasive synth wailing at us as it gets progressively louder. Song 4, Hankie, is easily the most abrasive, loud, creepy, and sonically unpleasant of all the songs on the album. The synth plays a repetitive 4-note melody that gets looped as other creepy elements are introduced, descending sweeps of booming pads, reverb-soaked xylophones that sound almost demonic, and an organ-like instrument that sounds like it's wallowing in pure agony, humming its death song. All of these elements are so thoroughly soaked in reverb and room ambience that they sound like they're coming from very far away, but at the same time as if they surround you from all possible angles. The song consists of two main parts, constructed in an A-B-A plot, where the starting session serves as both bookends of the song's runtime, and the middle part being an entity entirely separate to the other parts. As the song reaches its conclusion, we end up where we started, with the first synth singing its almost taunting melody as it fades out, and leaves us in a cold and unforgiving silence in its trail. It fades almost as quickly as it started, leaving listeners mesmerized and perhaps a little fearful. With a slow creeping introduction, Song 5, Grass, is the longest track on the album so far, playing a simple 2-chord melody of a synth slowly descending in pitch with every passing chord emitted. The track is built around this repeating loop with a soft, reverb-coated and understated beat playing along the melody, not loud enough to take control of the song, but just the right volume to where it's not easily ignored. It gives the song a sense of pace, keeping it from feeling like it's stuck in a total limbo. There are other synths playing soft and cold atmospheric sounds to add to the slightly uncanny and unnerving environment created by the sounds. During my listening to this song, I imagine myself to be in the middle of a cornfield. The sky is mahogany brown, lit up by a fire burning in the far distance, and the crops are golden brown, almost matching the dirt they rest in. The soft beat serves as an audible version of wandering through the endless field, with no signs of an end in sight. As the drums come to a halt and the synth floats into the void as it fades out, it is quite a relief after having been put through the bash and unforgiving ride of the previous song, but this is not necessarily a reward for it, as it is still cold, unnerving, and unwelcoming. Even though it's not a very friendly sounding song, it is too interesting to ignore, as the song creates such a mood that is barely present in modern music at all. Song 6, Mould, lifts the mood up a little bit by bringing in a voice sample of what sounds like moans from a human. It is our main looping melody for the majority of the song. The sample melody being repetitive is a good thing, as it brings a layer of predictability to the track. The other two synths that are brought in bring a warm but questionable atmosphere to the track, making it one of the more calming and comfortable tracks, with a slight hint of something buried underneath the surface. The track does not progress a lot, as it is only 3.5 minutes long, making it one of the shortest tracks on the album, but considering how simple and repetitive the song is, I personally believe that the short runtime serves as a good thing for the song. Song number 7, Curtains, shares elements in common with the previous song, Mould, as they both have a repetitive looping melody going on for the majority of their running length. However, Curtains is not short, and its repeating melody plays constantly in the background as a sort of wallpaper or backdrop for the track. The melody in question gives off a haunting vibe, like walking through an old house haunted by ghosts at night. It is slow, creepy, but kinda comforting as the repetition makes it predictable and more easily fades into the background. The track goes along with a synth playing small, pleasant sounding notes above the main melody, which keeps the track from becoming stale or boring. It is a very pleasant listen from A to B, and it ends almost the same way as it begins, beside the main melody slowing down slightly and eventually fades into silence. The track has throughout its runtime been putting us in a hypnotic trance, so when it ends, we don't notice it immediately, but our daze ultimately fades off and out as the album's tracklist keeps on going. Song 8, Blur, is the first track that is evidently distinct from the previous songs, as this one has a more pronounced and noticeable beat that clicks along the entire song. It fades in, like most of the tracks from the record does, and it keeps the exact same rhythm and tempo through it, with synths playing a handful of small but catchy melodies, all adding to the atmosphere of the track, though this effect does not last long, as it slowly fades out, just as quickly as it begins. I would personally say that this song in particular is slightly unmemorable, as it barely has any elements to begin with and does a very sparring amount with its elements, or does not change them at all throughout the entire runtime of the song. Although it is not a highly memorable song, it still fits the vibe that the album has done a so far stunning job of establishing, and therefore feels like it belongs to the tracklist, even with its limited execution. As the song concludes, we are yet again left in silence, and wait in anticipation for what comes afterwards. Song 9, Weathered Stone, contains remarkably similar elements to Blur in the fact they both have a beat, but Stone is even more up-tempo than its predecessor. The drums are louder and punchier, and there is far less reverb in this track, making it sound drier and clearer, and sounding like it's being played from a shorter distance from the listener. A muffled synth bass plays a repetitive bass line that goes on for most of the track, alongside other repetitive synths playing other repeating melodies. The track gives off a tribal vibe, as some of the instruments sound similar to acoustic instruments such as wind instruments, clanging metal, and regular whirl drums. It is also one of the more sinister sounding tracks, as it does not sound nearly as moody, but rather mysterious, playful, but also potentially disguising its danger, like being lost in a jungle and attempting to find a way to exit the dangerous habitat. The track's simple production creates a playful zone that makes it comfortable to listen to, which, along with the very noticeable and prevalent beat, is one of the main factors that makes this track stand out. At the end, one by one, the instruments break apart their said mold, piece by piece, until we are left with one synth playing a soft and sweet little tune, before it stops, and we end in a surprising silence. Prepare for whatever next may come up. But right after Weathered Stone ends, we are pulled out of the sonic silence by a deep metallic swirling sound, which repeats itself indefinitely. Song 10, Tree, is one of the slowest songs off of the entire album, and is very infamous for making listeners paranoid and or scared. Though the main synth contains the element of repetition, it is not aiming to create a familiar and recognizable atmosphere, and it achieves instead a feeling of dread, as the repeating metallic swirl lingers a cold and slightly perturbing menace to the song's audio landscape. Slowly as the track progresses, other sounds are introduced, like a cold, windy, and powerful lead synth playing 4 notes with variations, and a repeating, reverb-soaked and unrelenting arpeggiator pinging away in the background. It creates an atmosphere almost directly comparable to the track Hankie in a sheer disturbance factor, and it is also easily the most hypnotic track off of the first disc. The entire piece is about as dark as you can possibly get in ambient music, and the track almost gives off an evil presence. The track fades off into silence after a thunderous synth comes in and crushes everything, sounding like the track imploded in on itself. On no other track is the silence as obvious as on this one, as it has the longest running fade out, but also the most relaxing and relieving of all the outros so far. Starting off with a sound that resembles what sounds like an elevator bell, indicating you've reached your designated floor, leads into this looped arpeggiated synth playing a repeated melody along a few other synths. Track 11, Domino, is another one of the repetitive songs. I like others like Radiator, Blur, and Tree. The elements of this song, besides the main riff playing through the entirety of the song, consists of one synth playing a pure tone that rings repeatedly through the track, similar to the elevator-like ding heard in the opening of the song, and other synths creating small clicking sounds and atmospheric background noises. The track basically stays like this for its entire runtime and does not evolve, except for some slight changes in the settings on the arpeggiator synth's filter, giving it a low pass and a high pass filter effect. It ends in a slow fade out as usual, as we have by now become accustomed to, and the anticipation arises as we enter the closing minutes of the first disc. As we enter the exit hallway that we were dropped off by the elevator from Domino, we are greeted with a rumbling and droning bass note, followed alongside loud wind chimes and unintelligible vocal snippets, both high and low-pitched. We have reached the final song of the first disc of the album. Track 12, White Blur 1. The wind chimes are easily the star of the show on this track, as their sound is completely different from the past sounds we have heard so far. They bring a sense of familiarity, as most people have probably heard the soft bell sounds of a wind chime, as the other synths played notes that amplify the mysterious and evocative mood. The track's style is slightly different from the mold that has been established by the previous dozens of songs, as the notes played by the synths are not quite melodic, but rather a solid and unwavering drone, which has so far not been a very prevalent element in the previous songs. It creates a creepy but meditative atmosphere to the song at the same time. It is chaotic but controlled. The track ends with all the sounds ending abruptly as the last bass synth pulses off one last laser-sharp bass note. The first disc meets its conclusion, and what a closer White Blur 1 is. It is by far the shortest track on the album, yet it somehow feels longer than it actually is. And because of its short runtime, it does not get any less interesting with every replay. Being the only officially titled track on the entire album, Song 13, Blue Calx, is a great opener to the second side of the album. It is a cold and mechanical sounding song, and it has a slow clicking metronome sounding beat that clicks along through the entire song. Along with some big but cold sounding synth pads, the track is almost a complete counter of the opener on disc 1, which was the song Cliffs, serving as a great contrast to the kind of tracks that can be heard on the record. The track's production makes the song sound weightless, like we're out floating in space. Its droning but somewhat comforting presence persists until it slowly fades off into silence as we prepare ourselves for the next track. Song 14, Parallel Stripes, is a track that mostly consists of two synths. We have a soft angelic choir sounding synth that softly sings as the track goes along, but the synth is in a constant competition with another buzzing synth, which sounds a lot like a running freezer. For me, the track has a Cosmos Chaos element to it, as the choir synth does not sing a melody but rather plays freely, playing a different string of notes every single time. And the buzzing synth constantly plays the same exact note. It gives us a sense of something new in a familiar environment. As the song ends, the buzzing synth slowly becomes a drone before drifting off to silence, and we wait for the next track to begin. Track 15, Shiny Metal Rods, is in particular a personal highlight for me, as it is the most bombastic sounding and beat-centered song of all of the tracks. The track is also exclusively percussion driven, with a heavy and highly earwormy drum rhythm. The only synth playing in the track is a wailing synth that comes in for a second every now and then, and maybe another synth playing a level of noise in the mix, with the drums. The track keeps up this enchanting and static electricity charged drum pattern throughout its entire running length, almost resembling a heartbeat inside the chest of a robot. The track sounds like what it feels like to work with heavy machinery in a factory, and it knows it. It keeps its bombastic attitude all the way to the end, where it ends abruptly. Right after the metal clinging and heavy banging of drums and percussion of the previous track, we are met with another atonal track without a single melody. Track 16, Grey Stripe, consists 76.22% of the time, and yes, I did the math, of sounds from a synth that seems to replicate wind noises. The wind noises are ever evolving and changing in their tonal style, and not one phrase of the synth's signature sound is ever repeated. This makes the track sound very inhuman, as it is unpredictable and sounds like something that came from another planet. Because of its non-existent song structure, some may also find the track to be an uncanny listening experience, purely because of its lack of a structural repetition that a lot of other songs from this album work with. With few exceptions, the track is purely wind noises, but there are some sound effects brought in, like bleeping and blooping sounds reminiscent of the usual portrayal of alien technology in media, and clicking alien sounds, making the track sound like aliens attempting to communicate through a source like a bad AM radio signal. Gargled up speeches interrupted by electromagnetic pulses of the earth, alongside thunderstorms. It ends silently with the last wind noise calming off, and the silence embraces us like the calm after the storm. As out of nowhere as this follow-up song can be, we are greeted by the pleasant sounds of song 17, Sea Twig. Like a lightning out of an open sky, Sea Twig consists of a simple melody played over a synth that sounds like a muffled toy piano played underwater, alongside some stabbing synths playing the more bassy notes. The track goes on for about 2 minutes and ends quickly. Being the most distinct and juvenile sounding track from the record, it almost does not even fit onto the album, but because of its uniqueness, it makes it highly memorable and a standout of the album, amongst its more traditionally composed fellow ambient pieces. Starting off with an uncanny sounding wind instrument playing a looped melody, we are met with the immediately intimidating atmosphere of song 18, Windowsill. Quickly the track evolves and includes more acoustic sounding instruments, like tribal drums, and percussion instruments like a shaker and a vibraphone. The drum rhythms are drowned in both reverb and echo filters, making them sound big and booming. The echo adds a layer of decay, making them sound relentless and foreboding. The track keeps on trucking with these elements until it gently pulls one instrument away from another, and we are left with the last plinging notes of the vibraphone sounding synth. The main theme going through this record is that all these tracks are repetitive in one regard or more, and that is no exception with this track. Being a vinyl and cassette exclusive track of the album, Song 19, Stone in Focus, might be the second most known track of this entire album, consisting of 4 elements: a deep bass playing 3 different notes, a lead synth pad playing the higher notes, and a slow clicking metronome beat like the one from Blue Calx, and a quiet lead synth sometimes playing 5 notes on top of all the other synths. With these 4 elements, the track essentially creates an infinite loop, as it never goes through any melodic changes, just 3 chords, looped, and in a runtime of just north of 10 minutes. To me, this is my personal favorite track from the album, as I personally never get tired of the sound of it. Whilst writing this review, it has been almost the only track I have listened to during the writing process. To me, the track feels like floating in the middle of an ocean, in the middle of the night, with the only bright light being the water illuminating with a soft shade of green below you. The water is warm, and you naturally float on the water with no risk of you drowning. The phenomenal sound production of this track in particular makes this track so simple yet evergreen and fresh. The song could very well have been released today, and most people would probably believe it was recently made. It is that well composed and crafted. I have no scientific backing of the following claim, and all that I will mention of is from my own personal trails of thought, but I believe that the thing that keeps this track from ever feeling stale is that the chords sound like the music equivalent of breathing. It is such a natural part of our lives we don't even notice it, like the length of this track. The first chord is the beginning of the breath, the second is our lungs at their full capacity, and the final chord is the exhale, and the cycle repeats. As the song progresses, the metronome-like beat decreases in pace and slows down over time, making it feel like time itself is slowing down around the song. And as the song reaches its conclusion, we hear the chord pattern one last time, and then the song softly fades out. The song just feels completely effortless from beginning to end, like the true state of mind flow in audio form. The song quickly became a fan favorite after its release, and it has easily become one of Richard's most beloved songs of all time. Not much new can be said about the song, as most others have already spoken about what can be said, but the magnificence of this song can truly not be understated. A phenomenal song from beginning to end, which never gets old. For the majority of this album, the mood has been rather somber and on the melancholic side, with few spaces of warmth in between them. But that is about to change with the following songs. Song number 20, Hexagon, is one of the most uplifting and optimistic and just overall cheery songs in the entire album, being one of the few that is driven with a consistent and bouncy beat, with a very present kick and snare, and some clicky yet pleasing hi-hats. The song contains a very playful and bouncy energy to it. Along with the beat, there are several different synths playing a repeating melody with distinct tonality to them. All of them play along or off of each other in the most positive way, as they not only seamlessly merge together but also broaden the soundscape of the song, making it feel grand, powerful, yet under complete control. A lot of people have claimed that this song is the one that sounds most like a song that could have been on his previous album called Selected Ambient Works 85-92, and I personally agree with that claim. The song keeps on trucking for almost 6 minutes, and ends abruptly on a sudden but satisfying note, and softly fades off in a tape delay effect. As I've grown up, there have been many things I started to enjoy and began to see the value of in a different light. One of these things would be my own personal view of my childhood, the innocence connected to it, and my eternal gratefulness for how good life was when I didn't have as much responsibility than that I do now. And no other song on this album reminds me of that gratefulness more than this song. Track 21, Lichen, is what I and a lot of other people think of to be the song that resembles the most like what a Brian Eno ambient song would sound like, which could not be a more positive compliment to this genre of music. Consisting of a bunch of flute-sounding synthesizers that play yet again a structural repetitive melody that is kept at a running time of just above 4 minutes, which is rather unusual for the songs on this album. The track radiates a sense of warmth and comfort, much like Rhubarb from Disc 1 does. When I listen to this song, I imagine myself waking up in a summer house on the side of a big mountain somewhere in Norway. The sun is peeking over the opposite mountains from where you are. There's a thick amount of fog resting in the valley between you and the other mountain, and you feel the warmth of the sun's rays softly landing on your skin as you just sit there enjoying the moment, the bliss, the appreciation for life, and how even though life may not be perfect, we always have time to slow down a little and appreciate the consistency of the sun. Not everything will return, but the sun always will. The song lets us float in a state of bliss and softly fades off into silence, almost like watching the sun rise and reach a height in the sky, where everything is lit up and the day has begun, waiting for our first move of the day. And just like us, we wait patiently for whatever this album has in store for us after this moment of fresh air and warmth. But almost immediately after the conclusion of Lichen, Richard decides that he has had enough warmth and comfort and plunges us directly back into the darker aspects of this album, with song number 22, Spots. Similar to Parallel Stripes, this song is built up of a non-repeating droning synth that plays several non-harmonizing notes with a bunch of whistling and dusty sounding audio particles floating through the speakers. There is not a lot to say about this track in particular besides the hidden human speech, which is strongly obscured by the rest of the song. There are sounds of both men and women talking to each other, playing throughout the entirety of the track, but they are so engulfed in both reverb and incredibly quiet in the mix that the speeches just turn into unintelligible mouth sounds. According to Richard himself, he states on his own personal website that the talking in the song is a tape-recorded conversation between a police officer and a woman who had murdered her husband by stabbing him to death. A friend of Richard had stolen the tape, and Richard decided to include the content in the song. With this information in mind, the track becomes even more unsettling and downright disturbing to listen to. The song continues almost without change for the majority of the song's running time, and has a similar ending to Parallel Stripes, where they both end abruptly in a delay effect and fade into silence. Spots can therefore be considered to be the dark cousin of Parallel Stripes. Continuing on the dark ambience, we are almost immediately plunged into a very acid-inspired droning synth that plays a pattern over and over again, sometimes slowing down and speeding back up, as other synths come in and play unsettling string-esque notes, which gives this song a very unsettling mood, and could easily be the background sound to a scene in a horror movie. Song 23, Tassels, is a very consistent piece of ambient music that constantly plays with filters that change the audio signature of the main acid synth, like the track is twisting our perception of right and wrong and makes us question how much time has passed since its start. Eventually, the song fades off into silence as the main synth is drowned in a low-pass filter, stifling all of the higher frequencies until it is almost inaudible rumble, and contains a longer period of silence after the end than most of the other songs on the album, making for a highly menacing conclusion to the song, and a pause that seems a little too long for what we have been accustomed to from the past songs. As we near the end of the record, we are met with the longest song of them all, Track 24, White Blur 2. This song is very infamously known for its extremely long running length, running at almost 11.5 minutes in total. The song is without a doubt one of the most repetitive songs off of the entire album, consisting of one synth playing the same 3-note melody over and over for the entirety of the song, only broken every now and then by some sudden and incoherent sounds of noises, speech stifled in different kinds of distortion filters, and a muddy sounding and looping snippet of someone laughing, mainly in the left channel of the stereo mix. All of these elements come together in a blend of both consistent and random way, making for a highly uncomfortable listening experience. Often cited as being the least fan-favorite song of the album, there has often been people baffled by the artistic decision of leaving White Blur 2 on the album instead of replacing it with a song like Stone in Focus. As previously mentioned, Stone in Focus was a vinyl and cassette exclusive song on the album, as the running length of the entire album with all of the songs included exceeded the maximum capacity of the CDs back in the day, and therefore Stone in Focus was removed from disc 2 to make room for the other tracks. However, there's been a lot of fans who wished that White Blur 2 was the song that was left off of the CD release, and Stone in Focus was kept, as many fans greatly dislike White Blur 2. I am personally not a fan of the song either, but I am under the personal belief that the album would have been feeling slightly more incomplete without the inclusion of the track. It may not be a fan favorite, but it is one of the most recognizable songs of the album. As the song slowly arrives to its conclusion, the melody slows down, fading into a decay effect, and ends in silence, very similar to songs like Spots, Hexagon, Curtains, etc., leaving us in a hypnotic stage like a lot of the previous tracks, and we get ready for the last 2 songs of the album. Originally being the last song on all of the physical releases of the album, it has become the second final song after the digital version of the album was released on Aphex's official website. The song has often been compared to the ambient works of Jean-Michel Jarre, which is a very valid comparison as the song contains a lot of similar elements to the songs of Jarre, but perhaps just without a beat or rhythm. The song contains several different synths playing along with each other, flowing through different chords, often containing tritones, which makes for a very menacing and almost danger-inducing soundscape, with the only part of the song resembling a rhythm is an echo-soaked stabbing synth that clicks every other first step of the bars of music. The song repeats this segment of chords for the entirety of the song, but the elements are pulled apart, played separately, and sometimes repeated, making for a hypnotic but yet recognizable ever-changing landscape, furthering the ambiguity of the song's nature. As the song reaches its climax and ending, the song roars into one last note before abruptly cutting into the note and ending in a silence that quickly muzzles the resonating final note of the song. On the original release of the album, This final note functions as a very sudden and abrupt ending to such a long album, but it effectively also serves as a very powerful ending to such a demanding album. But we still have one more song to talk about. Originally being one of the 269 songs released from Richard from his very infamous SoundCloud dump back in 2015 to 2017, Song 26, TH1, is a very exclusive track, as it was released 23 years after the album's original release date, and therefore not a very known addition to the album as a whole. TH1 is a very abstract dark ambient track that runs for a little over 11 minutes in total, and consists of several synth pads that play a section of music that lasts for a little over 2 minutes, and is looped a total of 5 times. The song sways back and forth between unpleasant and more comforting chords and tonality, that makes it feel like the music equivalent to a rush of emotions to the head, constantly switching up its mental state. Not much can be said about this track, other than the ending of the song fades out like the majority of the other songs from the album, except it's given both space and time to fade out, making it for, in my own personal opinion, a more satisfying and pleasing ending to the album. Considering that the song was not a part of the album's tracklist for over 20 years, it fits surprisingly well and has personally grown to be a vital part of the album as a whole for me. A great ending to an absolutely phenomenal album. Throughout the album's playthrough, Richard D. James shows his great understanding and deployment of suspense, release, sonic construction, and pacing, and proves that he is a man who has a great appreciation for music that tests a listener's patience and attention span, but simultaneously the album also functions as good music to put in the background when you're focusing on something else. One of the album's greatness is easily on how flexible it is. There's a ton of stuff for you to notice and analyze if you focus on the music, but it is ambient music after all, which makes it fantastic for just letting it run in the background. Not to mention James's excellent usage of nostalgia and a sense of innocence in the songs, especially on songs like Rhubarb and Lichen, which have become some of Richard's most well-known and beloved songs. His ability to create human elements in music that is created using 100% inhuman instruments is a greater achievement than one would imagine it to be. Although this album can be challenging and downright sometimes a little too far stretched for its own good, and will definitely not be everyone's cup of tea, the positives heavily outweigh the negatives, and therefore makes this album, in my own personal opinion, the greatest ambient album we as humans have made so far in our history as a species.